There is a moment in every transformation that no one talks about. Not the fall, not the rise, but the silence in between. The space where who you were no longer lives, and who you are becoming has not yet arrived. It has no name, no applause, no clear direction, just stillness. And in that stillness, everything is decided. You are not lost. You are being rewritten. This is the forgotten lesson of Easter, not just a story of resurrection, but a blueprint of identity death, of who you must leave behind in order to become the one no one saw coming, because resurrection is not loud. It is not public. It is silent. Christ rose in silence. The stone rolled with no audience, and still everything changed. Napoleon Hill understood this power. He wrote that a man who cannot sit with himself in silence will never hear the voice of who he truly is. Because your identity is not found in noise. It is forged in stillness. It is spoken in thought. And it is sealed in decision. The world will try to name you. Family will label you. Society will assign you. But only you can resurrect you. And that resurrection begins the moment you stop performing who you were and start becoming who you were born to be. So the question is not, who have you been? The question is, who are you becoming while the world is still silent? This is not a video. It's a passage, a mirror, a quiet reckoning with the deeper self you've ignored for too long. You're not broken. You're buried. And the silence is the key. In Napoleon Hill's language, definiteness of purpose requires the elimination of all that is indefinite. So before you build the new, you must bury the old. There is a part of you that was never meant to survive this season. Read that again. We often cling to the very identities that are silently suffocating our potential, not because they are good, but because they are familiar, predictable, safe. You were taught to maintain consistency, to be reliable, to be recognizable. But what if the version of you that's so consistent is the very reason your evolution feels impossible? What if your next level of wealth, peace, and purpose is not something you reach, but something you must become? And to become it, you must let something else die. The ego does not fear failure. It fears irrelevance. And that's exactly what identity death is, becoming irrelevant to your former self. You begin to feel disconnected from old habits. You no longer crave the validation you once chased. Conversations that used to energize you now feel hollow. The mask starts slipping. And for a while, you feel lost. Not because you're broken, but because the false version of you is breaking. This is the tomb, not a place of punishment, but a sacred chamber where the unreal is stripped away and the essential you is born. We fear silence because silence reveals what noise has always hidden. In the quiet, you can't pretend anymore. You can't perform the character you've outgrown. You can only sit with the echo of who you've been and make a decision. That's what Easter really symbolizes, not just the rising, but the willing surrender to the fall before it. It is not the story of a man avoiding death. It is the story of a man choosing it, choosing to let the former identity collapse so a higher self could take its place. And here's what most people don't understand. Your rebirth is not waiting for external permission. It's waiting for your internal release. You can't carry your old self into a new life. Napoleon Hill wrote, "No man can rise to fame and fortune without carrying a definite chief aim in his mind and devoting all his energies to its attainment." But what he didn't say outright is that this level of devotion requires sacrifice. You must sacrifice the comfort of who you've been for the clarity of who you're meant to be. You must bury the performer, the people pleaser, the imposter, the emotional escape artist, the quiet dreamer who kept lowering the volume of their soul just to stay in the room. You must kill the version of you that always almost becomes something. That almost identity is the greatest liar you know. It keeps you at the edge of transformation, but never lets you cross. And every time you obey it, you reinforce the lie that this is all there is, that you're not ready. That playing small is safe. It isn't. It's just familiar. And familiarity is the drug that kills reinvention. So here's the quiet truth. You're not stuck. You're loyal to an expired identity. And you're waiting for someone to give you permission to let go. But no one's coming because no one else can do it. This death must be self-authored. In Hill's words, you must burn all bridges behind you. That is the identity death. It is final, irreversible, and necessary. The bridge you burn is not to other people. It's to the version of yourself that kept choosing the comfortable over the courageous. It's to the version that made peace with mediocrity, just to be liked. Kill that version. Grieve it if you must. Thank it for what it tried to protect, but do not resuscitate it. Because here's what lives on the other side of that death. Silence, not as absence, but as presence. You begin to hear your own voice again. You start to move without explanation. You stop negotiating with your calling, and slowly, in the dark, in the tomb, beneath the noise of the world, you begin to remember. You were never here to fit in. You were here to resurrect something eternal, but you cannot rise if you will not first surrender who you've been. The tomb is not a prison. It is a passage, and when you walk in willingly, you do not come out the same. Not death, not rebirth, but the becoming of nobody. In Hill's terms, this is where thought, faith, and auto-suggestion begin reconstructing the inner self, but without proof. It is the cocoon, the womb, the waiting room of transformation. Let us begin. There is a space between the identity you buried and the one still waiting to be born. It's the space where you are no one, not the old self, not yet the new. Just breath, just silence, just presence. And in that emptiness, most people panic. Because when you're no longer performing who you were, and you haven't yet become who you're meant to be, the world doesn't know what to do with you. And worse, you don't know what to do with yourself. You reach for distractions. You check your phone. You scroll. You cling to routines that no longer serve you, just to feel like someone again. But in this sacred pause, the truth is simple. You are becoming. But becoming requires stillness. It requires surrender. It requires a level of inner quiet that feels like death, but is actually reconstruction. Napoleon Hill called this the realm of faith applied to thought. You don't see evidence yet, but you're speaking new truths in silence. You're repeating new beliefs no one else hears. You're rehearsing new self-concepts in the dark. And even though the world sees nothing, you feel everything beginning to shift. This is what the caterpillar must feel in the cocoon. It has no wings yet. It doesn't recognize its form. It only knows one thing. There's no going back. It doesn't crawl again. It doesn't beg for its old identity. It waits. And that's the terrifying beauty of the silent hours. They are the test, not of action, but of alignment. Can you sit in the unknown and still claim who you're becoming? Can you let go of your old voice and still speak truth in a whisper? Can you withstand the discomfort of becoming nobody until the new identity fits your skin? This is what few are willing to endure, because becoming nobody threatens the ego. And yet, paradoxically, this is where all power is born, in silence, in invisibility, in solitude. You begin to realize your next level will not be built by being seen. It will be built by being certain when no one else is watching. This is what Hill meant when he said, faith is the head chemist of the mind. When faith is blended with thought, the subconscious instantly picks up the vibration. But faith without noise is frightening, because now you're trusting a voice that only you can hear. You're repeating affirmations your environment doesn't confirm. You're embodying a version of yourself that reality hasn't yet caught up to. And so, you are becoming. But in secret, you go quiet. You detach. You enter rooms and no longer need to explain your stillness. You let silence speak for you. And though it looks like nothing's happening, everything is. Because here's what few understand. The silent hours don't delay your destiny. They design it. This is the chamber where your thoughts begin to align with your identity. This is where you learn to hold vision without evidence. This is where identity becomes decision, not emotion. There will be days you feel invisible. Let them come. Let them pass. You are not here to be noticed. You are here to be known first by yourself. Because once you know who you are, the silence no longer threatens you. It becomes your weapon. You'll stop filling space with explanations. You'll stop chasing validation for your becoming. You'll begin to see that real power moves quietly, and when it speaks, it doesn't ask. You are in the void, the in-between, but not lost. You are in the most powerful phase of evolution. You are becoming nobody, so you can emerge as somebody the world never saw coming. Let the silence do its work. Let your thoughts become your temple. Let your faith become louder than your fear. Because when the time comes, when the silence ends, when the hour turns, you won't rise as a version of your past. You'll rise as a voice forged in the fire of invisibility. That is the power of the silent hours, and you are living them now. beautiful. Now we arrive at the quiet return, not to the world, but to yourself. The moment you rise, not to be seen, but because you become someone who no longer needs to hide. This is where the identity forged in silence begins to move, not in noise, not in display, but in unshakable alignment. Napoleon Hill called this mastery of self before mastery of circumstance. Let us continue. No trumpets, no audience, no announcement, only breath, only light leaking through the cracks of a stone that was once sealed, only the quiet footsteps of a self no one expected to rise. This is the inner resurrection, and it begins long before the world ever sees you differently. There is a moment in your becoming when the inner shift is complete, not because your environment has changed, but because you have. It's subtle. It's sacred. It's the moment you stop negotiating with your limitations. The moment you stop asking for permission to evolve. And in that moment, you rise, not with noise, but with clarity, not with force, with authority. Napoleon Hill said, "Before success comes, a man is sure to meet with temporary defeat. But if he continues in spite of it and keeps his purpose clear, he will rise." But Hill wasn't talking about rising in public. He meant rising internally, in the silence after identity death, and the void of becoming. Because that's when the real resurrection happens. Not when others clap, but when you no longer need them to. When you stand up, even if your hands are still trembling. When you speak the truth, even if your voice shakes. When you return to the world, but no longer belong to it. That is the quiet strength of one who has rebuilt from within. You're not here to impress. You're not here to prove. You're here to embody. There is no performance in resurrection, only power. It is not the same as a comeback. A comeback is fueled by ego. Resurrection is fueled by essence. You're not trying to be seen. You're simply no longer hiding. You walk differently now. Not faster, not louder, just truer. The self you buried was heavy with expectation. This one is light with conviction. The old self waited for signs. This one creates them. The old self asked to be chosen. This one chooses itself. And this shift changes everything. Because when you rise internally, the world responds externally. Not because it gives you power, but because it can feel that you no longer need to take it. There's no more convincing, no more explaining, no more waiting for alignment. You are the alignment now. This is where your walk becomes your testimony. This is where presence speaks louder than persuasion. This is where legacy begins to whisper, "You're on time." You see, there's something holy about a soul that's risen in silence, because no one can take credit for it. No one can say they gave it to you, and no one can take it away. The world didn't see you in the tomb. It didn't hear you in the void, but now it can feel something has shifted. Not because you said so, but because you no longer need to. This is resurrection without an audience, and it is the most dangerous version of power. Why? Because it's rooted, because it's quiet, because it's not looking around for applause. It's looking ahead for impact. And here's what no one tells you. The most powerful version of you will emerge in moments that feel unremarkable. A deep breath, a silent decision, a subtle refusal to shrink. It won't look like a victory, but inside, you'll know you have risen. You will walk into rooms that once intimidated you and feel nothing. You will revisit people who once defined you and feel sovereign. You will hear old doubts whisper and smile at their weakness, because you are no longer the self who believed them. You have been rewritten, not because the world said so, but because you no longer needed it to say anything. This is what it means to rise without a crowd, to wake up different, to walk without seeking, to speak without pleasing, to move without looking back. It is not performance. It is permission. And once you've risen this way, you will never shrink for anyone again. Because you didn't just survive, you resurrected from within. And no one can touch that. We now enter the chamber of self-declaration, the place where your identity is not proven through action, but spoken into existence through silence. Napoleon Hill called this autosuggestion, the silent repetition of belief that programs the subconscious and sculpts identity from the inside out. Let's begin. The world is loud, but your destiny responds to whispers. Every day you are speaking something into yourself, not out loud, but inwardly. A constant rhythm of words behind your actions, a silent narrative behind your behavior. And that story, more than any external force, is what determines who you become. Napoleon Hill knew this. He wrote, Autosuggestion is the agency of control through which an individual may voluntarily feed his subconscious mind on thoughts of a creative nature. In other words, you are always becoming the words you silently believe, not the ones you post, not the ones you perform, but the quiet ones, the invisible sentences looping beneath your breath. I'm not ready. I always mess this up. Who do I think I am? These aren't just thoughts. They are instructions. And every time you repeat them, your subconscious obeys. It arranges your actions, sabotages your focus, and guides you back into the identity you're most familiar with, even if that identity is killing your calling. Because your subconscious doesn't respond to truth. It responds to repetition. And that's why silence is so powerful. Because in the absence of noise, you can finally hear what you're actually telling yourself. When the crowd disappears, when the distractions fall away, when the performance ends, what remains? What do you say in the dark? That's your real identity. That's the voice that must evolve. If you want to shift your life, you must first shift your language. And I don't mean motivational slogans. I mean the private, unspoken words you whisper between failures, between attempts, between breaths. It's easy to speak life when you're winning. But the voice that shapes your destiny is the one you use when you've lost, when nothing's working, when you're doubting everything. When the old self wants to come back and wear the crown again, that's when you speak, not to the world, to your soul. You say, I am not that anymore. I am not who I was. I am what I've decided. This is what the masters do. They don't just move in silence. They speak in silence, with intention, because they understand something most people never realize. Your identity is a loop, and the only way to change it is to interrupt it. Most people speak what they feel, but the awakened ones speak what they intend. Not because they're delusional, but because they know identity doesn't follow feeling. Identity follows declaration. And when that declaration is made without evidence, when it's whispered in the dark, when it's repeated in the silence of uncertainty, that's when it takes root. The stone doesn't move until you believe it will. The voice doesn't shift until you re-script the story. The world doesn't change until you speak a new self into being. This is not poetry. This is programming. Hill understood that every act of faith must be accompanied by language, not just action, not just vision, but consistent, conscious, internal conversation. So ask yourself, what do you say to yourself when you're alone? Not in front of the mirror, not during your morning routine, but when no one's watching, when you fail, when you shrink, when you relapse. What do you say then? That voice, that sentence, that micro thought is either resurrecting you or reburying. And until you change that voice, no external success will ever feel sustainable, because your inner world will sabotage what your outer world builds. So begin here, not with shouting, with stillness. Speak to yourself like someone who is becoming. Repeat the truth before it feels real. Say the words before you see the proof. Because the future doesn't follow facts. It follows frequency. And if your internal frequency is still broadcasting fear, you will attract limitation no matter how much you hustle. Shift the frequency, one word at a time, in silence, in private, in power. This is how you build identity. This is how you rise without falling back. This is how you resurrect permanently, by becoming the architect of your inner voice. Because at the end of the day, who you become will always be the echo of what you first chose to whisper. We now enter confrontation. It is not poetic. It is the unmasking. The moment you stand in front of the mirror and realize you've been playing a role, not out of deception, but out of agreement. This is the identity you didn't consciously choose, but inherited, absorbed, and repeated until it felt like you. But now, you're waking up. And that awakening begins with a question. Who did I agree to be, and why? Let's begin. There comes a moment in every soul's journey where the mirror becomes unbearable, not because of what it shows, but because of what it reveals you've accepted. You stare into your own eyes and you see it. Not the truth, the mask, the carefully crafted version of yourself that was never entirely real. You didn't create it maliciously. You built it out of necessity, to survive, to be loved, to be enough. But now it's suffocating you because you've grown and the mask has not. And the more you evolve, the tighter it gets. The more you awaken, the heavier it feels, until one day you can no longer wear it. And in that moment, the question crashes through, who have I agreed to be And who would I be without that agreement? Napoleon Hill understood the quiet contracts we make with ourselves and with the world. The ones we never sign with ink, but with repetition, with unspoken surrender, with silence. He said, "A man's only limitations are those he sets up in his own mind." But what he left unsaid is that most of those limitations were installed before we were conscious enough to resist. You were handed a script, maybe by family, maybe by failure, maybe by a culture that said, "This is all you'll ever be." And you followed it, not because it was true, but because no one ever told you you could rewrite it. And so, the mask hardened. You became the strong one, the smart one, the funny one, the quiet one, the always okay one. Whatever identity earned you safety, you wore it. But now, in this moment of awakening, you see the truth. You are not the role. You are the one who chose to play it. And that means you can choose something else. But to do that, you must confront the mirror, not just glance. Look until the image cracks. Look until the reflections no longer feel like cages. Look until the silence inside you speaks louder than the labels around you. Because here's the truth. Most people live out a story they never wrote. They echo expectations that were never theirs. They live behind names they didn't choose until the pain of pretense becomes greater than the fear of change. And when that moment comes, you are offered the most sacred power a human being can hold. Self-permission, not to become something, but to become someone real. Not the version that's liked, the version that's true. But this takes more than affirmation. It takes confrontation. It takes pulling off the crown you were handed and asking, was I ever meant to wear this? Because not every success is sacred. Not every applause is alignment. Not every life you build is one you were born for. You can win in the wrong direction. You can master the wrong identity. And you can achieve everything and still feel like nothing. Because deep down, the soul knows when it's being impersonated. So you must return to the mirror. And you must ask, who did I agree to be in order to be safe? What masks have I worn so long they became skin? What part of me has never spoken because it never had permission? This is not self-help. This is self-honesty. Because once you see the mask, you can never unsee it. And once you hear the voice behind it, you can never go back to silence. And that's when you begin to rewrite, not your goals, your agreements. You stop agreeing to play small. You stop agreeing to tolerate disrespect. You stop agreeing to postpone your evolution. And in that space, the real you begins to rise. Slowly, quietly, fully. You'll walk away from roles that once defined you. You'll stop performing identities that feel too tight. You'll start speaking in a tone that even you haven't heard before. Because for the first time, it's not filtered through fear. This is what the mirror offers you. The death of false identity and the birth of self-authorship. Because once you remember that every identity is a choice, you reclaim the pen. You no longer need to ask, who am I? You begin to ask, who am I willing to become? That's not an act of ego. It's an act of responsibility. Because the life you want can't hear you behind that mask. And the purpose you feel pulling at your soul was never designed for the version of you that's afraid to speak. So take it off. All of it. The mask, the myth, the quiet agreements. And stand. Not as the perfect self, but as the true one. Because that self doesn't need applause. It doesn't need permission. It only needs you. And you're finally ready. Beautiful. We've reached the threshold. It's about becoming aligned. It's about legacy. Not as what you leave behind, but what you live from. We return now to stillness, not as emptiness, but as command. This is where the identity you've chosen begins to move without noise. Because the one who has become no longer needs to prove. Let's close the circle. The greatest power you will ever hold is the power to remain still and know who you are. No announcement, no performance, no explanation, just presence, just breath, just truth. Because when you finally remember that identity is not inherited, but authored, you stop reaching outward for confirmation and begin living inward with authority. This is where your legacy begins, not when you're recognized, but when you're rooted. There's a shift that happens after the mask falls. The silence speaks and the soul rises. It's subtle, but irreversible. You don't crave the same things. You don't chase the same noise. You no longer need to become in the eyes of the world because you've become within. And from this place, your actions change. Not because you're trying to be disciplined, but because your identity no longer tolerates anything that violates its truth. This is the quiet power Napoleon Hill was pointing to when he said, "There is no hope of success for the person who does not have a central purpose or definite goal at which to aim." But what he was truly speaking of was alignment. And alignment doesn't shout. It doesn't beg. It moves with precision. You don't need to scream to be respected. You don't need to rush to feel worthy. You don't need to prove your worth to a system designed to keep you performing. You just need to own the silence and live from what you know. Because when your identity is self-authored, your movements become undeniable, even if they are unseen. Your energy shifts. Your posture shifts. Your decisions sharpen. You start walking into rooms as the answer, not the question. That's legacy. Not a monument, not a brand, not even a reputation. Legacy is the unmistakable clarity that comes from living in agreement with your inner authority. It's the quiet that follows you into every space. The presence that makes people pause even if they don't know why. It's the stillness of a person who no longer flinches, no longer doubts, no longer explains. Because once you've built yourself in silence, you no longer fear losing yourself in the noise. This is what you've been walking toward. Not just a new result, but a new rhythm. A new way of being that doesn't rise and fall with external conditions. It is anchored. It is still. It is sovereign. This is your legacy, self-authorship. You are no longer reacting to the world. You are no longer conforming to a version of you that was designed for survival. You are designing from truth. And here's what's most powerful. That design is quiet, but its impact echoes. The people around you will feel it. They'll notice that something is different. Not because you told them, but because you become someone they can no longer define. You've stepped into the rarest form of power there is. The person who moves from internal clarity, not external pressure. You don't announce your identity anymore. You live it. You walk it. You are it. That's legacy. So stay with the silence. Let it speak. Let it lead. Let it become your most trusted source of instruction. Because the ones who change the world are not the ones who shout the loudest. They are the ones who have listened the longest to the voice within.